Quick question while you're waiting for the agenda.
Yeah.
Do you still want to revisit the lifecycle working group, or do we just want to hold off and see where that discussion goes? Since I guess we're sort of pending DP vendor feedback right now in that community.
Yeah,
That's it.
let's talk about the goals because I think so Mark is not going to be here. He has a a medical thing that shifted. I can't say more than I won't say more than that. Not
I'm waiting on some test results myself, so I totally get it.
yeah.
Uh,
So he had something just moved around in his schedule, and
so
nothing serious.
so do we want to do that next week?
So we could talk about the life cycle today, and then we'll push the repo discussion and reviewer discussion and all that to next week.
Okay.
All right. So, and then we can basically do talk talk about what we might be able to do. We can talk about who might have insight into QuickSight into the QuickSight, excuse me, Quick Start guides. And Laura, this sort of bumps into the dev platform pot group as well, because you know if we on the website we could point people at the POC and dev repo, and we could point them at or we could create a new repo or create a direct folder in that repo where we had you want to see a DPU run in a container, or, DPU software, OPI software run in a container. Do exactly this, and you can see it run in a container. First time putting it on an actual DPU, here's how you install the OS. Here's how here's how you initialize. Here's how you install the OS, and it would sort of dovetail into the lifecycle group on here are all the PCI settings and all the PCI behaviors that you should expect from that DPU IPU. Those two things by themselves are valuable to then publish widely, because we could say, here's how you run common software, and we don't have to have a lot of common software to run, but here's how you run common software on DPU and IPU, and look, it'll run on all the flavors that exist. You can run it on Marvell, you can run it on Intel, you can run it on NVIDIA, you can run it on Pensando.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just sort of processing that. I think we actually internally to F5 still have some of that content already. We just haven't formalized it.
Yeah.
We probably just need to have the right we probably need to partner with somebody who's a non-F5er to sort of review the content that we have.
Mhm.
And rewrite it so that it doesn't come out in our voice. So it gets a little bit more neutral. And not that it's not neutral, it's just
So one way we could go about that is publish what you have, and let's review it as a pull request, and let's review it there.
right. Got it. So you want it to go into GitHub coming from the Dev POC group, or do you want it on a blog post at the Linux Foundation?
Yes,
Both.
right.
Okay.
Because again, so we put a blog post out that's going to talk in general about it, but
Right.
having 15 technical steps, type this, do this, connect this, run this service, connect up, run this script. I mean, that is not a blog post. That's a how-to guide. The how-to
Right.
guide should go in the dev POC folder. The blog post would then say, hey, here's here's a practical how-to for getting one of the OPI proof of concepts with OPI base code and Nginx on top of it, running on multiple DPUs, and we could then use the lab to capture videos of this configuration, have a written guide. I mean, that by itself is an accomplishment that ought to be published. I mean, that's good. That's good work, right? Because again, these things aren't conceptually difficult, but
No, I agree.
they're not trivial in the practical details, right?
No, people need something that they can just look at and go, okay, great, you have this, so how do I use it? It's really hard when I do it without any content. People just need a guideline to do it, and it helps tell the story. I mean, I agree with you that it's something that should come out of the Dev POC group. It probably would have to be owned by me at this point in time in partnership with someone else.
Yeah. And again, we can review it. We can have a separate one-off, or a couple of one-off sessions where we do go in and do an editorial pass and a wordsmithing pass, so we can make sure it. I mean, putting it in your voice, as you say, is fine. If there's something in there that would be, when we go tell everyone about it, we wanted it reworded. We do an editing pass and find that, and we can do that in a couple of one-off meetings. We can ask here, what time slots. Pick a time slot. You can schedule a couple of meetings, or Sridhar can schedule for us, and we'll do the editing pass. So I think that's a very good goal, and that gets me the first part of my quick start how-to.
Let me add a note to myself to sort of go back and get some baseline work done there within my own team back at F5. Okay.
Yeah, because you guys did all the work. Again, we published demos based on it, but if somebody said, hey, I want to run that demo, they probably would get frustrated and stop unless they already were doing all this.
No, I think it's a pretty straightforward point, and would be nice actually to be able to vet with other people that aren't in the Dev POC group internally to this this group at OPI. It'd be nice if we built it and that somebody just took it off into the weeds. Well, I tried it in my own lab and it didn't work. Or I tried it in my own lab and it did work.
Yeah. Exactly. Or hey, we're gonna get someone to try it. So for example, we could get, I don't know, we could get a volunteer to try it in the lab who hasn't directly set one of these things up before, right? We could we could ask for someone to assign a smart intern or smart junior staff member, hey, take this guide. Here's the access to the lab. Go try it. Go try this OPI thing. It's kind of a good project. And when they trip, we'll walk through why they tripped up and why the guide wasn't clear. And there are a number of ways we could test this. I mean, I might be able to find someone at Dell who's in that situation that we could assign, because again, it doesn't take that long. I people who are always wanting to branch out, and they can't have you or Mark or Boris or Artek sitting staring over their shoulder, telling them, no, type this instead. I mean, they need, we need that thing to stand on its own. So we let them do. And we ask them then how long it took, what wasn't said, and if they get stuck, they then have a lot of experts they could go to find out, and then we correct the guide from there. So we can essentially what we used to call blind test it for game development. So write it all up and see if somebody can do it without you sitting there telling them what to do for your design.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So, okay, and that dovetails right into the lifecycle and provisioning on DPU, IPU behavior in a server. The more I think about, I mean, I was big on this last year, but I think that's the single most important deliverable out of the life first or next deliverable, because it's not like the lifecycle group hasn't done anything. It has. The next big delivery is that. Okay.
So I think we have a fundamental challenge and approach in which we're taking, and we need to define what it is we really want and what we're willing to possibly pay in terms to get there.
Okay.
And so last week you asked me to basically make a presentation with current status and challenges and offer some paths forward. And I made a quick 4 slides, really 3 slides to that effect. And if I can share them real quick. Looks like I can. Give me one moment. Actually, let me see if I can make this full screen just to make this consistent. That way there's no distractions. Okay, does everyone see that?
Yes, ma'am. Please proceed.
Okay. I'm much more, the way I kind of set up these slides is so we can just walk through and discuss and just kind of go from there. If you see something, let's jump on it. So at a high level of current status, which this is a reiteration, is we're trying to build consistency across of the DPU, XPU vendors and hardware system vendors. And largely we've gotten stuck in this power discussion where we've tried to figure out how to handle devices from the hardware vendor point of view, so that we can account for all the various use cases and account for the things that need to be accounted for so that the machine can properly initialize. And largely this is a result of devices that skirt PCIe compliance, but are more modeled as computers inside of computers. The further challenge that sort of exists here is the approach and modeling of the devices and what is regarded as management of them as well, in terms of, is there a management controller? Is there not a management controller? Is that VM? That's a whole other concern that we're kind of hitting against, with the realization that a lot of the vendors don't want to have a management controller. They want to have a virtual machine that gets preloaded, that's not really viable. But that's just something that's coming up. And so to kind of talk about the challenge we are avoiding is we're trying to avoid mandating a specific approach or behavior. And what I'm meaning by this is, if we mandate explicit PCIe device bus behavior, in this device ecosystem we have today, where vendors are already taking a different approach, we're not going to be some people's favorite people. We're not going to be their favorite project. Because at the end of the day, we're basically going to have to tell these vendors, you're going to have to make silicon revisions. You're going to have to change your firmware. You're going to have to go back to engineering your product. And in a number of these cases, they're already shipping the product. Because they may have to change their entire design or approach, which means we might be pushing them back by years at worst. And the countering argument right now is that these devices are just enhanced network cards. And I think the challenge we're struggling with is some of the XPU vendors don't necessarily seem to agree with this, in that they view them as more than just a network card. They view it as much more like a hypervisor, able to dynamically supply resources. The problem is, to do this, they also ended up skirting PCIe bus compliance. So there are some challenges there, and each vendor has their own unique situation. So I think some of this is to kind of to be expected as normal growing pains anyway, but there's a cost and benefit that we need to keep in mind here with any decision we make and any frame that we put it in. So I see kind of two basic paths forward, which is we could try and mandate some minimal starting point, but we risk pushback. Specifically, if we were to say, you will be perfectly compliant to PCI spec and those device initialization mechanisms within power on the machine. Well, we're basically saying we don't care about a bunch of your use cases that you are selling these devices to your customers with. And they may push back, and they may not agree with that, and they then risk basically revisions of silicon. We already know that the vendors are saying, in order to do some of the basic functions that would be necessary for, say, like supporting PLDM properly, they'd have to go back and revisit silicon anyway. So there is a benefit to this, which is we have a reasonable minimal starting point. And this is kind of what Dan has proposed. Okay. And this is sort of really needed, even if it doesn't meet the overall big picture desire of some of the vendors. The question that we probably have to internally ask is there sufficient incentive for these vendors to offset the cost of going back to engineering? That's the whole question we probably need. We can just internalize it, but I felt that's an obvious question because I think that's something they're going to be asking themselves. Then there's what we could also just kind of keep trying on the same basic path, which is try and bring everyone together. The problem is that this is the slowest possible path. And we're still likely looking at vendors needing revisions. We're looking at vendors disagreeing, but it is also the most inclusive path. So that's kind of really it.
So let's go. Okay, do you have another slide?
No other slides.
All right, let's go back to the first slide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, let's go back to the first slide.
Yeah, let me start sharing again.
Because it was important to have the whole thing laid out. Okay. All right. So if I'm a server vendor trying to integrate these things, and they all have different behaviors, different core behaviors, not, oh, they're going to run different software and all that. That's their value. But core behaviors on PCIe, so they're not very good PCIe citizens in some cases.
Correct.
Not in all cases. Then, and if I'm a customer deploying them, I have to worry about another failure mode and another complexity in my fleet management that has nothing to do with there are a bunch of microservers that I load this extra hardware on and have to configure. That again, that part is doable. But now I have to worry about these devices in a very special way that I don't already consider. Now,
Yes.
right? That's the,
Yes. But basically, the primary case is power on and initialization.
right. And then presumably, or to my understanding, reboot as well, and especially asynchronous reboot.
Yes. Yes, okay. And there are strongly differing opinions out there from some hardware vendors say, well, if the XPU asks for reboot, the host should reboot. Others like absolutely not, and there's a reality somewhere in the middle of that, but we have to get on the same page for that too, and that is one of the inherently difficult topics as well. The whole basic problem is you have to get to in a state where the PCIe device is entirely serviceable and entirely responsive. And for some of these vendors, that action is software, or tightly coupled with software that has to be initialized on the device, which means the device has to be fully initialized and booted with an OS and app, and the app stack starting to run. So that inherently starts where this fleet management issue just starts spawning from.
Right. Okay. So does anyone have any questions on the current status and kind of the discussion we just had, or any disagreement with either me or Julia about the situation or the statements we made?
I should.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I should provide a further update. Dan did make a presentation of his proposal. It was fairly well received. There were some employees of XPU vendors who did not chime in. We're hoping that they chime in this coming week, and maybe there's agreement there. It didn't feel like there was agreement. It feels like there were some questions and some need to improve it, but overall it was well received.
All right. So, all right.
Just as further context.
Yeah, for sure. That's good. That's really good. Anybody at all? Any thoughts, any questions? Yeah, go ahead, Venkat, please.
So the whole idea, again, I'm trying to understand. So the whole idea seems to be revolving around PCIe is a standard, right? And it's a fairly common standard we all adhere to. And somebody is going away from it for whatever reason. I think capturing those reasons would help. And if it is about the way I understood, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that until you complete your boot sequence and it will take longer, and they want to be more responsive or something else, then intermediate states and other things will come into picture, right? So I think putting those reasons together, maybe we just make a table of the vendors. I mean, you may have to call it out.
That is
to get clarity, right? So
that is something we did in the OpenStack community a long time ago. Was we basically started. We didn't. The easiest way to describe is name and shame, but we didn't name and shame. We put a hurdle out there for them to try and achieve, and then you say that you're certified through this compliance. But that also became a huge burden, a huge hurdle, and not all vendors were willing to take on that overhead.
All right.
Yeah, maybe there are. I mean, name and shame sounds a little. But I think just gathering, right? There are reasons, right? There are engineering decisions they have made, and then I think, and some of it may be open to discussion, right? And I think just
And-
kind of gather. It's more of a data gathering, right? So that we understand why is that they need to go off.
Yeah.
Just in the interest of time to market, if they have taken some certain shortcuts, which you will have to. Hopefully, they can fix it later and come back and comply with the standards later. But if there are other technical reasons, they'll come out, and that will be good for the design.
And that could be a nice happy medium between the two, between say Dan's approach and where we're at and where we're going, which is okay. Here's our goal. To get here, you need to do this. We recognize here are some of the challenges in the marketplace today.
Okay, so yeah, that's good. All right, let's go to the next slide, and then we can come back to this one as well. Okay, so when you were describing this one, and based on previous discussions, my first thought here was maybe what we do is we say, here's the spectrum of behaviors that DPU, IPU can have, right, based on all of what's out there. So here's the spectrum of our system design and then resulting behaviors. And here's how you handle each case, right? And take any point of commonality and bring that out, saying, well, in reality, you have commonality in the following areas. DPU IPUs in their practical implementation differ in this list of areas. Each behavior requires handling in a different way, and in fact, DPU IPU can be put into basically one of two modes. We'll call it the parent mode and the child mode. In the parent mode, the DPU can reset the OS and it's full control of the system. In the child mode, it's essentially behaves like a combination NIC HBA storage virtualized storage device. And we could simply document and enumerate the behaviors, the core behaviors, but now that doesn't feel as good to me as trying to drive standardization, but at least it gets you out of the big challenge in a way. And if we can't get people to agree on what it should be long term, then maybe we'll never be able to get them to agree. In other words, if we're having this much challenge getting the DPU IP vendors to all agree, now maybe okay, go ahead.
I'm not sure they have much of an issue, and I think they're actually capable of agreeing. I think the challenge is that agreement combined with hardware, like whole hardware system integrators and manufacturers, because they have certain approaches that their system initialization take, where these vendors don't necessarily align with, and they don't necessarily meet up. And that's kind of been the center of the discussion.
Okay. The other thing we could do is we could say, look, going forward, here are the DPU IPU modes, and we get everyone to agree to a standard for that basically kicks in at some point in the future, or rather, there's no hard cutoff date. It's just as people develop the next iteration, they then comply, and this helps the vendors because they're complying. It helps the system vendors because now they know what the behavior is going to be at a certain point, and we get much more standardized behavior and so on. But we don't try to say, look, that has to go in now. What we say is, as you produce your next revision. So when I produce the, flippity flop 4, I'm going to now implement the standard, and I'm going to publish that I implement the standard because everyone knows what that means. So we write the standard as here's where things need to go, taking into account the various modes of operation that are valid. What I called parent and child, which are poor names, but it gets the idea across. And it's like an ITF or an IEEE standard, or what some of the UEC standards are going to be. No one complies right now, and no one's going to comply with some of those things for a while, right? And again, as someone rolls out a new IEEE standard, typically there's not compliance. And occasionally you get a standard where somebody had actually implemented it, forced it through, historically, and they already had a version. But mostly that isn't the case. Same thing was true of T11 and T10. So, we can have a standard that's a forward-looking standard where we want the industry to end up, and that's a value proposition. Linux Foundation, OPI should strive for. We shouldn't be shy about saying, look, we've looked at this problem. Here's what DPU IPUs should be, and publish your future version comply and publish your compliance response to that idea. In other words, maybe trying to force the issue now is not okay, but we need to take into account all of the valid modes of operation, which I'm not saying we're not, but I'm just setting that as a possible guideline. And I'm saying it this way, hopefully to start a discussion, what we might call a friendly argument about approaches, or stir the pot from what you've been saying, Julia.
No, I agree with you. We need some place. I think that the challenge has just been not a disagreement between hardware vendors, and acceptable approaches to them to account for the non-compliant hardware that exists.
Right. So what we have to do is, okay, so we could also try to write up what's the mitigation for non-compliant hardware. What are the considerations? But
there's a whole. I think that the challenge in trying to go down that avenue is we can end up with lots of words that will quickly bit rot, and that may not be valid in certain cases, or may become more valid in other cases. I just think it's an area we probably want to avoid. We probably want to have some sort of standardization point to drive folks too. So I think that's kind of the positive of Dan's proposal. My hope is that we don't say everyone must adhere to it. I think we should frame it more as the goal is this.
Well, okay, so I'm gonna disagree on that, and then I want other people to comment. I think that what we should do is say, look, I mean, it's really two different documents, if you will, or two different sections. One is, here's the behaviors you see today, and here's some ways of dealing with them in a more common way. That's the compromise, don't force anything issue on what's out there today. Because again, there's a lot of hardware, out there, and there are ways to deal with it and so on. The second piece is, again, we got to get everyone to sign up to this. Everyone who's going to make a DPU IPU, and we publish it that way. We say everyone has signed up for this. Here are the behaviors you're allowed to have, and we then publish that, and we basically inform customers, hey, don't demand anything less than OPI compliance going forward. When people start complying, don't let somebody deviate anymore, or don't buy them. Now, we won't say it that way, but of course, that's always the intent with these kind of standards. Go buy the standards compliant version because it's good for you and good for the industry.
Absolutely.
But that standard compliant version because of the hardware involvement and system architecture involvement. And we have to allow for a scope of system architectures. We can't mandate only this architecture. We can't say, well, we like the way company XYZZY did it the best. So, and that's the one we pick. Everyone has to comply to that. That we can't do, because that starts to violate all kinds of Linux Foundation and industry rules, both written and unwritten. Right? That's anti-competitive. What we can say, though, is here's the spanning set of behaviors and architectures that we deal with, and here's the text that describes what you do in each case, how each case works, and so on, and get again that would be something everyone can sign up for, and now it removes some of the mystery without taking away anyone's ability to innovate and differentiate in this space.
So I have two thoughts.
Yeah, please.
If no one else wants to speak first.
Oh yeah, let's open it up. I mean, I could ask. I mean, again, we have the same thing in CPUs today, right? CPUs have very much the same thing, and we have competition in the CPU space because the standards allow for a variety of architectures, but basically say, here's the behaviors for each of those architectures that in a pretty clean way. Still takes a lot of effort to design a system, but that's more because they're inherently complex, not because people, stuff wasn't written down and isn't done in a standard way. And it doesn't preclude, new and interesting features either. And same thing with a lot of peripheral cards today. I mean, I think GPUs are going through a similar teething pain, and you'll see iterations of GPUs, and I'm sure there are people worried about the same thing for same kind of thing for GPUs. Thoughts from anyone?
Yeah, I think we've been over this ground before, Joe. That
Yeah.
we're stuck with the chips that are out there. They're not going to change. They're built. So I like this idea maybe of OPI having a template, to use your language, right? There's the parent-child, where the host is the parent. There's the case where the card is the parent, and maybe there's a sibling mode where they're equal peers. And then within each of those arrangements, there's a set of scenarios, right? Which is simultaneous cold boot, host reboot, card reboot, that fit into each of those. How do each of those work within those parent-sibling relationships? And then we basically say, okay, OPI has this template. Would the card vendors please tell us how they work in each of those scenarios? And they might just say, NA, we don't support that scenario, and that's fine. But it's really up to them to say, can they do that? And if they can, how does that work? And then OPI is a publishing vehicle for that, so that the users can navigate to their parent-child relationship, and then their set of scenarios, and then their card, and how does that work for them? So there's that. That's dealing with today. And then in the future, we look at that and say, well, that's a mess. And it's not really the vendor's fault. They're each trying to find their way, right? They're maybe not even experts in this area. They're trying to build a product, and this is a small piece of it. Can we come up with a holistic approach that says, in the future, if everybody did this in each of these relationships and scenarios, we could all do it the same way and it would be better? And then that gives the vendors a light on the hill to drive towards in their next generation chips. And they would be happy. Most of them I talked to would be happy to have an approach where they don't have to make the decisions and deal with the blowback from their customers. So there's sort of two tracks there, right? Document today and help the vendors publish how they work, and then create a path forward for future chips that is OPI compliant in a sense. Those are my thoughts anyway.
Mm-hmm. Others?
Yeah, understanding hardware and software dependencies hopefully will come out in that process. I think if we see this as data gathering and documenting to start with, that will help us. And then, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wish Dan Daly were on to comment, and then Oren, what are your thoughts on that from NVIDIA's point of view? I mean, and if you're like, I don't know if we can do any of if any of this is practical, that's also a valid comment. I don't know if you have that comment, but Oren, what are your thoughts in this area? And if you want to think about it and come back next week and let us know, that would be fine as well. Oren, are you actually there? Or yeah, so Satyananda, I saw you come off of that was you were my next target, so I'm glad you came off mute already.
Yeah, we got Dan's proposal last week. We are internally looking at it. That's the status on the proposal side. And yeah, we'll be happy with any standardization that OPI can come up with for our future products. For the existing products, yeah, I agree that we come up with a binning of models where the OPI declares these are the behavioral model 1, 2, and 3, and vendor can choose and say, yeah, we fit into one of these models, or yeah, we are not fitting into any of these. I'm fine with that.
Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts? So
Overall,
yeah, go ahead, please.
overall, I agree. I just think that it's going to be difficult in our current format to extract the existing behaviors, document mitigations, or how hardware vendors or end operators would end up navigating some of these things. And maybe the mechanism is, here's a link to this vendor document that covers this specific subject. That's a possible middle ground. But I think the thing we might want to consider is somehow, I hate advocating spending money, but I think in order to I think we probably need to consider if there's a way to get the people in the same place to sit down for a couple of days and try and hammer some of the stuff out in a high bandwidth fashion. Because right now we meet for roughly an hour a week. We end up with lots of, I need to go talk to someone else in engineering, or I need to go talk to other people. And we don't make much progress as a result because there's a 1 week delay in cycle time that occurs.
Yeah,
So I think if there's some way we could drive towards that, or bolt on or attach to, I think that would probably help velocity tremendously.
Yeah, so you can definitely propose a 1 day face-to-face meeting. If you have a constructed agenda and goals, people can then justify it. Most companies are open to that. And again, it can have a remote link as well. And we could put it, you could put a survey out and gauge the interest in having a 1 day preferably in-person session where this gets worked out. So yeah, again, it may not happen, but we can there's no reason to shy away from asking.
There's also the value of building cross-community trust too.
Agree. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts at all on this whole area from anyone? I know a number of you have experience with you know other chips or integrations and hardware standards and software standards. So if you have any input or thoughts, go ahead and share them. Otherwise, I'm out of topics. As we talked about the quick start guide and how to get going on that. We talked about so now we have the life cycle one. I have one more request, but it's not a discussion thing. It's just a request. So let's finish this discussion. Anybody have anything else to say at all? So Satyananda, Mark, I see you both off mute.
Yeah, I was just going to step in and just say I really think the idea of having a face-to-face makes sense. I think that's a great way to push the agenda forward. Looking at our outreach plans, SmartNIC Summit is the next event where we plan to have a significant showing from members in this group. If we can wait till that event, I know it's far, right? We're talking June. I think we'll need some time to prep for it. We can plan, a one-day session dedicated to advancing these efforts.
Yeah, we could actually do a two-part thing there. One, we could have a parallel session on this topic for anyone to attend and talk about all the ins and outs of what we're seeing and why this is sort of a problem, and get wider input on that. The second thing we could do is have a face-to-face the day before or the day after the SmartNIC Summit.
Yeah, I think having that as a goal could help us also arrive prepared, right? We can spend a lot of time aligning before that event, and then that event just kind of seals it. We work out the final hurdles and then move forward.
Yeah, and again, you're right. Tying it to the Summit's an excellent suggestion. And again, what we could do is we could have a one-day meeting or 3/4 of a day meeting before or after, and then and maybe after is better. And then, like I say, we can definitely get that session. We could get a 45-minute session to make a presentation and get feedback from people and get these ideas in front of people. I mean, we could do more than one session. I'm fairly certain we could get that get that on the agenda if we ask nicely.
This kind of dovetails into something that I have a question about, and I don't really want to interrupt the flow of this because obviously it's pretty important that we have an organized effort at the SmartNIC Summit that demonstrates what we're doing, because I feel like we need to repopulate some certain components of our groups. But that's kind of an aside. In light of that, also, Mobile World Congress is kind of coming up fast, and we didn't get a speaking slot, which we wanted. What we don't really have at this point is an organized showing. I know many of us have committed to saying or talking about OPI at our own individual booths, but I'm curious about if anybody has interest in sitting down and talking about how we want to approach Mobile World Congress from a unified perspective. We do have plenty of content and data to talk about what we're trying to do at OPI. I feel like it's a good opportunity for us to dumb down some of it and have a unified message.
Yeah. All right,
and I realized that this is the TSC, and I just sort of threw something big out there at the tail end of something big.
No. It's fine. I was going to say is let's get let's talk about that. We can talk about that here next week after the GitHub repo. I'll put that as the preliminary agenda, the GitHub stuff with Mark, and then this discussion. So, and we can
Well,
talk
can I
about, yeah,
can I
please.
quietly aggressively be a pushy program manager for a moment?
Of course.
I think we could probably organize this over Slack if folks are actually interested in this conversation. I think all we have to do, or all I could do, is I could throw out there the nugget that we need to organize this, and we could probably create a group to just have. I honestly think we need a group that talks about events.
We have one.
Oh, sorry, never mind.
It's called the outreach group. The problem with the
Got
outreach
it.
group is it's Tuesdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, and Tuesdays at 7 a.m. Pacific are very crowded. So, for example, I keep intending to go to it, and I've had a priority meeting within my company trump that meeting every single week for months.
Right.
And
so it's probably time to reschedule the outreach committee, because I'd like to participate in that, considering the work that we're doing. You know, it's going to dovetail into the Dev PSC group, and the two need to be in sync. And I realize this is sort of just the cost of doing business, and I don't again want to be interrupting this bigger conversation.
Please,
but we need to it sounds like the outreach committee needs to be rescheduled into a time that people can attend that are motivated. Not that the people that are currently on the outreach committee aren't motivated, but you need to make sure that there's energy in that space.
Yeah. So please start a team outreach thread on Slack to that effect, and I think it'll be receptive. Or talk or whisper Paul first in Slack, and Paul Pindell first in Slack, and then I think starting just a thread about whether the outreach can be moved.
I will. I'll do all that.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me interrupt you guys, and apologies for that.
I think that's fantastic.
All right. No, this is extremely important, right? I think that is an area where we are doing some work and it's not out there. And how do we find these deployment partners or, use cases and things like that? And so, without outreach, and Paul is aware, we have talked about it multiple times. But apart from that, right, I think this Mobile World Congress, ad hoc week, some of us could quickly set up something and discuss. Update from my side is that, internally, these things are set up so way ahead of time. So we may have to come up with other mechanisms where we go there and come up with ways to showcase, even if we don't have presentation spot, if some of us get together, we could create alternate ways of messaging how, DPUs are coming to telcos in a big way and how it disrupts. So we could do a little bit of messaging as well as showcase what we are doing. So it's important. If you're setting up something, keep me in loop. I can definitely contribute.
Right. Again, start that thread on the outreach Slack channel, or send an email.
Will do.
Yeah, or send an email to the mailing list so that we have an archive of it. The problem with the Slack thing is stuff is starting to roll off because we don't pay for support for Slack, and unfortunately, a lot of our business is done on Slack, and we have no record of it. Now they keep it because we could turn around and pay the fee and get access. And Sridhar, we may have to consider doing that. Could you please add that for the next board meeting to discuss whether we go ahead and spend the money, even if it's expensive, because people aren't using the mailing list, they're using Slack, and losing all of the history of what was said and done is maybe not the best. So add that to the board meeting. Let's have that discussion there. All right, thanks, Sridhar. All right, we're done then. 7:55, perfect time to end a meeting. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for all the work.
Thank you, Joe.